Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to be talking about what I'm going to miss in TBC with Wrath coming out. Things that we're going to look back and say, man, I think TBC did it better. Before we get into that, though, I would appreciate it if you followed my Twitch in the description below and sub to the YouTube. But let's get started. What are the things that we're going to look back, at TBC and think, they did it better than, and that expansion did it better than Wrath. And the first thing I think is definitely going to be heroic dungeons. When you think of heroic dungeons and dungeons in general in Wrath, they're very easy. You're just zooming through them very quickly. There's a lot of changes that have been made to threat and AoE. Every class is AoE now. And as a whole, the dungeons are just very quick, very easy, and you're just zooming through them. TPC heroics are the complete opposite. You've got a lot of scary mechanics. A lot of pretty much every caster in a heroic is casting something dangerous. All of the mobs, they might have a stun, they might have a disarm. There's always something going on with the enemies in those dungeons, and there's a lot of just very challenging encounters, especially chuff trash packs. Some specific dungeons known for being very difficult. It was common in TBC for people to consider Blood Furnace Heroic or Arca Heroic to be harder than Karazhan, and individual mobs in those dungeons commonly hit harder than raid bosses. For example, there are many memorable moments in an instance like Blood Furnace Heroic alone. There's just so many iconic things. You've got the second pull of the instance. Your tank could instantly get one shot by these mobs that multi-hit. There's two of them, and they like store up attacks. And as soon as they get to their tank, they're going to hit them like 2 or 3 times in a row. You can easily just die the second pull of the instance. You've also got these guys dropping landmines that can blow up on everyone. You need to kite those. You've got stealthed assassins that are going to kill people if you're not ready for them. And then, of course, you've got the gauntlet. And the gauntlet is something people constantly talk about, the Blood Furnace Heroic Gauntlet. Probably the most iconic thing in TBC dungeons. And it's these, if you've never done it, it's these ogres that you flip a switch before the second boss in Blood Furnace Heroic, and you have to deal with these waves of ogres. And, or sorry, waves of, yeah, they're ogres. Ogres or they orcs? I think they're orcs. You have to deal with these waves of orcs, and they come in like, 4 at a time. In one of the pools, there's like 5, and they are stunning your tank, they're threat dropping, they're going to charge people. They're just one-shotting people. Um, they're going to kill any caster in like a second. And these waves just keep coming. Your healer's going to run out of mana. Your tank is not going to have enough mitigation to live through. It's just insane. Super fun, super challenging. Feels like an accomplishment when you get it done. Every time you get up to that lever, you're like, okay, everyone get full mana. Everyone get ready. Are we buffed? Do we have a plan? What are we going to do? When you compare that to Wrath the Heroics, it just seems so much more flat, right? The Wrath Heroics are certainly going to be faster, easier, you know, nice, smooth experience, but going to miss a lot of those iconic and a lot of those memorable moments that I think it's a shame. I definitely think that the Wrath Heroics leave some things to be desired. So that's the first big thing that we're going to look back at TBC and say, I think those dungeons were a lot cooler in TBC. Next thing we're going to talk about is going to be itemization. Of course, Wrath the Lich King is the expansion of gear score. It's the first expansion where item level is a really big factor in how good an item is. And in general, items are going to be more homogenized. So let's talk about what exactly changes in Wrath and kind of how it would work. So the big thing in Wrath that changes is there's no longer going to be healing power on items is a big thing. So caster gear has spell power on it. Healing gear has spell power on it. And the main difference between the two is that healing gear typically is going to have MP5 or spirit on it, whereas caster gear is going to have more spell crit and especially spell hit. So you have that happening. Then you also have the fact that Blizzard has gotten a lot better at designing items in general. So there's far fewer items in Wrath that are just completely useless. Lots of items in original Vanilla Classic were horrible and completely useless. TBC definitely had a decent amount of items that just you kind of never wanted to see drop. No one's ever going to really use. Well, in Wrath, they did a lot better job of designing these items. So you're going to find that there's just a lot more items in Wrath as well, especially in tier 7 with so many bosses in Nax, multiple difficulties of all the raids with 10 and 25 man. There's just so much more loot. And because there's a lot less just terrible, useless items, you just have a lot of options to choose from. And you're typically going to pick the item that has the highest item level that you can get that has stats that can be used for your character. There's always going to be exceptions to this, and this doesn't really apply to weapons and trinkets as much, especially if you're looking for a specific type of weapon or speed of weapon. But when it comes to your typical armor pieces, you're generally just going to go for the highest item level piece that you can get that is going to have the stats that your character uses. Um, Specifically, I guess, as long as you're like a caster, the high item level items are going to be really good for you as long as they don't have those MP5, the spirit, the stats you don't want. And as a physical DPS, as long as it doesn't have, uh, you know, a bunch of defensive stats that a tank would use, or too much intellect or MP5, you're pretty much going to want just the highest item level items. And this is where gear score starts to take an effect, and it kind of simplifies the items. Uh, and you start looking at things a little bit differently. In Wrath the Lich King in tier 7, for example, the best items are going to be from the end bosses of the tier 7 content, and it's item level 226 gear. And the second best items are going to be item level 213 usually. Now, it's not something we are used to even talking about in TBC. You usually don't talk about the item level. You usually don't think of items in terms of item level. And it's obvious that in a new raid or new raid tier that we'd expect the items to be better. But even when we see content like Zulaman coming out, lots of items from Zulaman ended up being really good, not just because even though their item level would be lower than some of the items in Black Temple or some of the items in Hyjal, you still had some really good items. And just like I mentioned before, in TBC as a whole, you're really not looking at things in terms of item level. In Wrath the Lich King, it's a much better indicator of how good an item is. And like I mentioned, as long as you don't have any dead stats on an item, if it's got high item level, it's going to be good for your character. So a little bit more boring, I would say, when it comes to items. A little bit more stale. I think it makes it a little less exciting when you're getting your items because there's just so many more items, so many more options. But on the contrary, it's going to be easier to gear up, quicker to gear up, and you're going to feel like there's less experiences where you're stuck with an old item for a really long time. Uh, less situations like a rogue might feel in TBC where they use the Latros shifting blade is best in slot for, outside of arena, it's best in slot until, Black Temple. That's kind of crazy that so many raids come out and they're using a blue sword from pre-raid still. So you're going to see a lot more of those things, those, I guess you could say, oversights, not causing issues when it comes to Wrath, but items are going to be a lot more homogenized, a lot more simple, a lot more basic, and I think less exciting. Next, we're going to go to probably the biggest thing and probably the most impactful thing. And the reason I have it third is because the first 2 points kind of build into it. And it's the pre-raid BIS gearing, and specifically how much faster it's going to be in Wrath than previously before. So for a lot of people, pre-raid BIS gearing is the most fun part of the game. It's the most exciting part of the game. I've never really heard anyone say they don't like pre-raid BIS gearing, whereas I regularly hear that it's people's favorite part of the game, favorite part of the launch. So pre-raid BIS gearing is really popular, and it was really, really fun in both Classic and TBC. Classic, it took a long time. A lot of the items have low drop rates. In TBC, it took a while because a lot of the heroics, were more challenging, and multiple people wanting some of those heroic items. Of course, you couldn't do as many heroics per day because they just took longer. Well, in Wrath the Lich King, the pre-raid BIS gearing is going to be the shortest it's been, and I think it's going to be far, far shorter. It typically is on private servers. A lot of private servers don't even consider pre-raid BIS a thing. And the reason is because Naxxramas is so easy, especially Naxxramas 10-man. It's far easier than even Karazhan and TBC. It's so easy that you can go in before you even really put too much work into your pre-raid BIS gear. And especially if you start doing Nax 10 and Nax 25 early, that's so many bosses, that's so much loot across multiple difficulties. You're just going to be gearing up so fast. You've got Reputations, of course, in dungeons in Wrath as well. You can get rep faster by using the tabard in any dungeon. The dungeons themselves go faster because of what we talked about before. So pretty much everything about pre-raid gearing is just accelerated in Wrath of Lich King, and it's just going to be a much shorter process, which I think is a little bit sad. I think it's going to be like the fastest we're going to get to where people are raid logging. There's potential that if you raid the first week that raids are available, uh, that potentially even 1 or 2 weeks later, just a couple weeks of raiding, you might be just done with all pre-raid bis gearing. And so rather than something that took, you know, weeks or even months to get all the stuff you wanted on your character, you might be done with pre-raid bis gearing in like a week in Wrath. Um, and you wouldn't even necessarily need to be playing 24/7 as soon as the raids come out. It just might be really fast. So that's something that I think we're going to look back and say, man, Vanilla Classic and TBC really had a much more lengthy period of gearing process, and that is a really fun part of the game. So I think that's going to be something that's going to be a little disappointing. But again, comes with a silver lining. You'll be able to start on your alts much faster. When you get your alts to max level, they'll be able to gear up really quickly. And yeah, the average player is just going to be able to get a lot more geared a lot faster. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is going to be, a briefer one, and it obviously is going to vary depending on who you are. But for me, it's dailies and how required it feels to do dailies. So in TBC, I never felt like I ever had to do a daily. I did a few fishing dailies, a few cooking dailies. Sometimes I would do the dungeon daily. A lot of times I would forget. I wouldn't really pick it up, and I'd forget to ask to get it shared. I wouldn't even do the dungeon daily a lot of the times. But when it comes to Wrath, some players are going to feel like they just have to do dailies, especially for specific professions. So, for example, personally, I will have to do jewel crafting dailies. You have to do jewel crafting dailies if you want the special jewel crafting gems that are going to make your character stronger, the gems that only jewel crafters can use. You need to do dailies to buy the recipe for the gem you want. And then you need to do dailies to actually get the material that's used to craft the gem. So you're going to need to do dailies every time you get a new gem. And you're also going to need to do, obviously an initial set of dailies at the start to get the patterns and stuff. And so it really just comes down where you land on dailies in general. Some people see more dailies coming out, more widespread dailies being more impactful as just more content. I more lean on the side of I hate dailies. I don't ever want to do a daily. And in TBC, I never felt compelled to do dailies and pretty much never did them. I did a couple of the Isle of Quel'Danas dailies, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to do these. And then I stopped doing them. Never did Skedis. I never did Ogre Law. I never did the Dragon Wing rep or the Nether Wing rep. Never felt like it negatively affected any of my characters. Never felt like I was weaker because of it. When it comes to Wrath, you're going to have dailies for a lot of the professions, and you're going to have more dailies coming out as new hubs come out as well. Eventually, you'll get the Argent tournament dailies. And I would say, of course, a lot of us are going to be able to get by without doing the dailies if we don't want. But I would say dailies become more widespread, become, more required. And I would say that's definitely not something I like. Honestly, one of the big complaints that you hear about retail is feeling like you've got chores that you have to do every day. You feel like you have to log in and do the chores before you can start playing and doing what you really want. So that's something that I am not a fan of, and was not excited, to see be more prevalent in Wrath the Lich King. So those are the things that I think, looking back on TBC, I'm gonna miss. And think that probably TBC did better. Let me know what you guys think. Any other things I missed? What are you guys gonna miss about TBC going into Wrath? Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you guys next time.